Just another introduction about myself. So my name is Isabella El Deeb. I'm the Anti-Human Trafficking Women's Coordinator at FCJ Refugee Center. So essentially I run workshops and groups for migrant women, newcomer women, to create kind of community workshops. We meet twice a month. Aside from that, I work with survivors, women survivors of human trafficking. That includes sex trafficking, labor trafficking. That's kind of my role on the anti-human trafficking team. And if you have any more questions about the programs I run or a little bit about what I do, feel free to email me at any time. Victoria, I think, will send over my contact information afterwards. So yeah. Next slide, please. Other way. Okay, thank you. So the workshop today is going to be centered around reflective thinking and essay writing. So this is kind of the schedule we have for today. So first, I'm going to talk about intersectionality, positionality, and privilege, what those concepts mean and how that's really important in essay writing. Then I'm going to go into reflexivity. And then third, we're going to reflect on today's discussion and preparation of essay writing. Next slide, please. So the goals of the session. So reflective thinking encompasses a set of abilities that students use to examine their own thinking and that of others. So this workshop will provide participants with the strategies to question, challenge one's own thoughts, ideas, and assumptions, and how to express it in writing. So the main outcomes of this session, the first one will be to increase reflection on one's strengths and purpose to deepen motivation for learning, increased understanding of the importance of challenges and failures to build self-confidence, increased ability to express one's thoughts and opinions through writing. Okay, so now we're going to go into the main topic, which is intersectionality, positionality, and privilege. Next slide, please. Okay, so first, I want to talk about intersectionality. So intersectionality was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. So intersectionality is a theory that argues we have various social identities that overlap, such as race, gender, sexuality, class, etc. So as you can kind of see in this diagram that I put, you have all these different identities. Everyone has different identities, your race, your gender, your nationality, but you can see how these different identities are overlapping and how they kind of combine together. So why was this term coined? So the term was coined to highlight the idea that all oppression is linked, and it acknowledges that everyone has their own experiences of discrimination and oppression, and we must consider everything and anything that can marginalize people. So intersectionality really takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complexity of the prejudices they face. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I wanted to put a little example here about what intersectionality really means, like in a more concrete example. So as you can see in this diagram here, it's from the Equal Payback Project. So you can see in the description, it says, compared with white men, African-American and Hispanic women make even less than white women. So you can see the white man makes $1 per hour. Then compared to him, the white woman makes 77 cents per hour. But then an African-American woman will make 64 cents per hour. And then you see a Hispanic woman will make 56 cents per hour. So essentially what this kind of means in the terms of intersectionality is that you can't just take into account one specific identity. So you can't just say, for example, gender, just man versus woman. And when you're doing kind of research, you need to look specifically as well at the other kinds of identity. So you also need to look at, say, for example, gender and race. So you can see in this example that even within gender, there's disparities between some people are a little more privileged, some people are less privileged. So that's kind of why we need intersectionality. So now we'll go on to positionality. So positionality is the notion that personal values, views, and location in time and space influence how one understands the world. So it is really similar to intersectionality, but the way that positionality differs is that it refers more to one's social location or their position within an intersecting web, or kind of a socially constructed hierarchical category such as race, class, etc. So it's the notion that personal values, views, and location can really influence how we understand the world. So positionality is I see what I am disposed to see. So with that, it recognizes that people's perspectives, their perceptions of reality, and their actual reality, so their truths, are dependent upon where they are positioned in society. So in other words, it sees truth and reality as being relative and multifaceted. So that essentially means there's no one truth. Everyone has their own truth. Okay. So here is a like a diagram about positionality. So you can see that positionality is more of like a web. So you can see how all these different identities kind of connect together, and at the center is you. So that's where you're positioned. So different from intersectionality, it doesn't really overlap. It's everything connects together. Oops. It went all the way to the Okay, so positionality, why is this important? So positionality is important, especially in research, because it can directly influence how the research is carried out, but also whose voice is represented in the final paper. I'm just wondering if anyone had any questions so far about intersectionality or positionality, or if you want, we can save these questions more for the end. So I thought it would be good to kind of for everyone to work through their own positionality statement. So a positionality statement can kind of change based on your research, what you're doing, what your essay topic is about. It really depends. But as a general rule, it's maybe good to just start off with more of like the kind of basic kind of identities that you have. For example, your name, your age, your gender, where were you born, your language. And depending on your research, you can continue on to maybe talk about your family size, your education, for example, your citizenship, economic status. So for example, if you're doing research on, say, I don't know, on caregiver migration, just like a topic. Maybe you can talk about your own occupation status. Maybe you do have experience as a caregiver. Maybe in the past you were a live-in caregiver. So it kind of depends on what your research is and what you're exactly doing. So I think for now, what we can do is maybe we can take 5 minutes and everyone can write down their own positionality statement just based off the sentence I have here. But if you want to include anything else, then you can add more to it. And if you would like to share afterwards, then that's great. But if you want to keep it to yourself, then that's fine too. So we can give about 5 minutes to work through your positionality statements. Okay. So I hope everyone can hear me well. If you don't hear me, just feel free to interrupt at any time. So I wanted to put together this little diagram to really capture what positionality is. So as you can see on one side, you see the whole map of Canada. Then on the other side, you see kind of just like a drawing. So For someone that is born in Canada or for someone that has visited Canada, we know that there's all these different provinces, we have different cities, and we have like this idea of what Canada is. But on the other side, for example, someone who has never been to Canada or who has not lived in Canada, they don't know about the different provinces. They don't know like we have different provinces, and this is just kind of an example of what they see. So that's why it's important to understand positionality, because wherever your position can really impact how you view things. So for example, where your position in the world can impact how you see Canada. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're moving into the last identity or the last kind of concept, which is privilege. Privilege refers to certain social advantages, benefits, or degrees of prestige and respect that an individual has by virtue of belonging to certain social identity groups. So historically occupied positions of dominance over others typically include whites, males, heterosexuals, Christians, and wealthy. So this is just a diagram here about what are some types of privilege and how can we combat privilege blindness. So for example, different forms of privilege can include your religion, can include class, whether you're upper class, can include your ability, are you an able-bodied person, your gender identity, your gender, education, race. So privilege in the little diagram in the bottom, privilege is the benefits and advantages held by a group in power or in a majority that arise because of the oppression and suppression of minority groups. Furthermore, privilege is, by the social justice definition, the advantages people have that they don't often think about because they never have to experience the oppressive side. Understanding it requires an active effort to see things from the perspective of other unprivileged people. So these are just some examples of different privileges. I'm not sure if anyone else has some other examples of ways that people can be privileged. So for example, we can also add, say, citizenship status. Whether you're a citizen, you might be more privileged. Whether you're a permanent resident, you might be less privileged. Different statuses can equal different levels of privilege. Next slide, please. So here I put a little meme that says, I have the privilege of being totally unaware of my own privilege. So as you can see in this diagram, this white male does not really even understand what the word privilege is because he never had to experience what it was like to be unprivileged. So that's what some people experience. So that's why it's always important to think about your privilege and understand how that impacts your life. And when you understand that, that's something important you should take in your writing as well. Okay, so just a quick recap of the 3 topics we discussed. So intersectionality is the relationships and overlap between different social categories. Positionality is being aware of your personal identities and how they shape your worldview. Privilege is benefits and advantages held by those in positions of power. So now there's the concept of reflexivity. So reflexivity generally refers to the examination of one's own beliefs, judgments, and practices during the research process and how these may have influenced the research. If positionality refers to what we know and believe, then reflexivity is about what we do with this knowledge. So going through these kind of different concepts, the intersectionality, the privilege, the positionality, this is an act of reflexivity. We're kind of reflecting on ourselves, we're reflecting on our identities, and then we're seeing how we can use that knowledge about ourselves and how that's going to impact our writing and our essays. So now what can you do next? So first, what you can do is you can check your privilege. Are you someone that's middle class? Are you able-bodied? Are you cisgendered? All social identities play into your privilege, even if you don't ask for it. So it's good to reflect on these and consider how this impacts the discriminations you do or you don't experience. Then what you can do is you can listen and learn. So intersectionality is about learning and understanding views from the press. So what you can do is listen to, include, and meaningfully collaborate with diverse groups of the oppressed. So you should hear and honor their words. However, remember, it's not the responsibility of marginalized groups to do all the work in educating people on their experiences. So this often takes up lots of emotional labor and should never be taken for granted. So you should be prepared to help undertake some of the labor by doing your own research. Next, what you should do is make space. So for example, if you're about to start an essay and you're writing on a certain topic, you should ask yourself first if you're the right person to take up space on or speak on certain issues. So you should center stories and actions on those with lived experiences. So don't speak for them and don't speak over them. So for example, say if you are a male and you're writing about an essay, for example, on women's rights, you should ask yourself first, are you the right person to be writing about this essay? If not, maybe choose a different topic. So next, you should watch your language. So many of the words we use every day are ableist, exclusionary, and offensive to marginalized communities. Then you should be prepared to feel uncomfortable when you're starting your essay. So exploring all these concepts can create discomfort. Being part of a dominant group, however, does not make you a bad person. So having guilt and shame is normal, but what you should do is you should use this to motivate you in your writing. So when you understand that, it helps to develop self-knowledge and authenticity in your writing. So I just wanted to end off here with this slide. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this author. Her name is Chimamanda Adichie. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She's a Nigerian author and she's an amazing author. So I really recommend everyone write down her name, look at her books. So she has a TED Talk on YouTube called The Danger of a Single Story. So just to kind of briefly talk about it. So in the talk, she says, our lives, our cultures are composed of many overlapping stories. So novelist Chimamanda tells the story of how she found her authentic cultural voice and warns that if we only hear a single story about another person or country, we risk a critical misunderstanding. So essentially, this is how I wanted to end off this presentation, in the sense that we should all acknowledge we have different lived experiences, we have different identities, we come from different positions in life, we come from different sorts of privileges, but the most important thing is to work through those, to understand them, and then prepare yourself before you're writing to position that within your writing. Okay, so that's the end of the workshop today. Thank you so much, everyone, for allowing me to be here, to listening to this presentation. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. I wanted to leave some room for questions, or anyone had any thoughts. Has anyone heard about intersectionality, privilege, or positionality before? Is this something new to everyone? I don't know. Open to hearing any comments, suggestions, feedback.
For me, the terms intersectionality, positionality, they are new. Maybe I feel I know about privilege, at least as a term, but intersectionality and positionality are new. And it's clear. Today's presentation, I like that. And I need to read more to know about that also. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad to hear that it was something new, and I'm glad to hear that you know a little bit about privilege as well. So what I can do is I can maybe send the slides to Victoria, and I think she probably will send it out to everyone, or it'll be available. But it is good to, even if you just search on Google about intersectionality and start looking at different resources, it's really useful to kind of go through the resources that are available online and to really write down, take notes, and understand what each of them mean. But I'm glad to hear that feedback. Thank you.
So while everyone is thinking of any other comments, I do have the link to the Uprooted program that I've been mentioning that we're starting in January. So I'm going to be sending that in the chat right now. If you're interested in registering for the program, please feel free to click on the link and then just put in your details, and we'll definitely reach back to you about the next steps. This topic, and Tyler is here, the one that's going to be teaching the classes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, but the topic of intersectionality is definitely something we're going to be talking about in the Uprooted classes, right?
It's usually how I think we frame sort of the introductory section so that we can sort of enter into a lot of the other research that we do with the right kind of frame of mind. So yeah, thank you so much, Isabella, for such a wonderful presentation. It was really great.
Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, I put the link in the chat. And so if anyone needs to still register, please just click on the link and it'll take you to the registration page. Does anyone have any last final questions, thoughts, about anything else? Anybody else? We're all good. Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to ask, like, Isabella, do you see like an intersectional framework sort of like helping a person think about what it means to live the experiences of other people? That's sort of one of the things that maybe like an intersectional analysis allows a person to do.
Definitely. I think the most important thing is always having the intersectional lens because, like we talked about in the beginning, the example with the pay gap, it's important to always have that lens because you can't group people or you can't group people's stories into one kind of box. Like you can't just like I believe, for example, I work with a lot of women. You can't put the stories of just women into one. You kind of have to include that intersectional lens to understand how all of our stories, all of our lived experiences really differ. And there's no one kind of like relating it back to the other kind of concepts. There's no one truth, there's no one reality. So I feel like the intersectional lens is something that's more kind of baseline in all forms of research, and that's where you should be starting off. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, I will be stopping the recording right now.